to the influences of that particular environment. The student first connects to their own experience and prior knowledge, and then works in reverse to ascertain the theories and principles that contributed to that truth. A music teacher, for example, may wish to teach the terms forte and piano to a young music student. A behaviorist teacher might verbally define the terms and then demand that the student verbally regurgitate that information. A cognitive learning theory teacher might play a loud passage at the instrument and then a soft passage, asking the student to describe what they heard. Every student with normal hearing and basic speech skills can describe the difference between the examples because what they heard confirmed what they already knew. Some things in life are loud and some things are quiet. Hearing the differences on an instrument was only building on their previously attained knowledge. The teacher might then provide verbal and visual definitions of the terms forte and piano, but only after the concept of louds and softs were experienced and absorbed. Pestalozzi theorized that concepts should be taught through direct experience before the introduction of names or symbols. Mace made the following recommendations to music teachers. Teach sounds before signs. Lead students to observe by hearing, imitating sounds, instead of explaining these things to him or her in a word, to make active instead of passive in learning. Give the principles and theory after the practice. These approaches will be preferred in different quantities by some personality types more than others. It is also worth noting that teachers must pay attention to the incomplete understandings, false beliefs, and the naive renditions of concepts that learners bring with them to a given subject. Teachers then need to build on these ideas in a way that can help each student achieve a more mature understanding. If students' initial ideas and beliefs are ignored, the understanding that they develop can be very different than what the teacher intends. Our final point in the theoretical background is micro and macro perspective. A micro perspective is the details of a specific task or idea. Macro perspective is the big picture or the global view of a specific task or idea. The micro perspective builds on small pieces of information. Jean Piaget proposed that emphasizing structure and building upon it aids in the memory and retention process. The small steps building on each other contribute to the understanding of the whole. This process of teaching is easily controlled by the teacher, but it can result in regimentation. A student might feel that the pieces of information are pointless if they are not connected to a larger global picture. For example, a music theory teacher might teach a student several harmonic cadences. The student may be able to identify and perhaps even construct them on paper. However, if no connection is made between this theoretical concept and oral memory or recognition of cadences, the performance of cadences, or an analysis of the cadence in the student's current repertoire, the student may feel a disconnection between the theoretical example and the oral sound. Although students that prefer a step-by-step or sequential approach can solve problems with incomplete understanding of the material, and their solutions are generally orderly and easy to follow, they may lack a grasp of the broad context of the body of knowledge and its interrelationships with other subjects and disciplines. Macro perspective, establishing a global understanding before details. The German Gestalt psychologist suggested that structural or comprehensive understanding could produce greater success than rote learning. These psychologists theorized that the human mind could grasp large concepts and then break them down into smaller compartments, and that the understanding of the whole is a stronger determinant of successful learning than the accumulation of understandings about separate contingent parts. Before global learners can master the details of a subject, they need to understand how the material being presented relates to their prior knowledge and experience. However, the practical problems of presenting the larger global picture cannot be ignored. For example, most music teachers work within a strict time schedule. If a teacher attempts to comprehensively explain every element in musical knowledge, very few elements will be taught within one lesson or class. We'll now discuss the practical model, which is teaching the C major scale to our 4 sample personality types. A music teacher is faced with practical challenges. If a teacher settles into one mode of operations based on their own personal preferences, then there is the potential for a dissatisfying learning experience for the students who do not share the teacher's preferences. For example, if a teacher only presents material in a behavioral style, giving step-by-step directions, but little explanation or opportunity for the student to experiment or explore, a precocious student might lose interest in the process. Likewise, a teacher who teaches with broad explanations and elaborate analogies might confuse and discourage a student who requires detailed explanation and specific instruction. Practical concerns such as the length of the instruction period, examination or performance deadline, and students' attention span may also contribute to the format of the lesson. There is also, of course, the consideration of personality type. The rational or idealist student might appreciate the step-by-step instruction of the behavioral approach and may enjoy moving from specific details to a broader view. The artisan student, though, might have a greater level of interest if the global perspective or big picture was provided before the details were explained. Furthermore, learning styles must also be considered. An artisan student might learn more easily if the concept was demonstrated with a physical action that encourages them to experience information. The rational student might learn easily with a chart, which is visual learning style, or a detailed explanation, which is an auditory learning style. There is no scientific formula to aid the teacher through the maze of potential teaching ideas, but rather the teacher must rely on an awareness of the multiple theories on learning and personality types that exist, and should endeavor to embrace new ways of teaching. When a teacher understands the importance of altering the teaching style to fit the learning style of a student, then the teaching of every concept and skill can be transformed into a creatively fulfilling experience for both the teacher and the student. The following is an example of how a piano teacher might teach a C major scale to 4 different piano students in the context of private lessons. The chance to tailor one's teaching style to the needs of a specific student is one of the major advantages of private lessons. Using David Keirsey's 4 personality types, the teacher might first ascertain the dominant personality traits of the student. For example, the artisan, according to David Keirsey, needs to be emotionally engaged, loves thrills, and enjoys performing. The guardian needs to understand the rules and will dutifully follow them. The rationalist needs to comprehend the theory and design behind a concept, and the idealist needs a personal connection to the concept and to the teacher. The teacher will then develop a personalized response to these needs. For the artisan student, perhaps the emphasis will be performance. The artisan will most likely be intrigued by how scales sound, feel, and look, potentially from an audience member's perspective. They might be interested how quickly, loudly, or impressively they can play scales. The guardian will have an emphasis on rules. The guardian appreciates rules and directions. A step-by-step approach to fingering will be necessary. They may be very interested in the continuity of scale design throughout all the major and minor keys, and will thrive in learning them all one by one. The rationalist student might need a structural analysis for an emphasis. The rationalist may need both an understanding of the rules and structure and an overall understanding of how all scales are constructed before they even agree to learning scales. An emphasis on construction will be appreciated as they will want to understand how scales work. The idealist may need a personal achievement emphasis. The idealist will need to see how a C major scale fits into what they have already learned about music. They will need feedback that what they are doing is important, that they are doing this well, and that this will help them learn more about music. They may need to be rewarded after they learn a scale. The teacher formulates a lesson plan specific to the needs of the student. Although there are many ways to teach a concept, conscientious planning will enable the piano teacher to teach a topic in the most appropriate way for a specific student. The lesson plan may be transformed throughout the lesson, but a starting point should at least be established. Because the artisan loves to perform and be physically engaged, the first step will be to hook their interest. The artisan will not be interested in a detailed explanation of scale construction or fingering, but will instead need to be challenged as a performer and a thrill seeker. The teacher might begin by playing scales in contrasting contexts. Simple examples such as Mozart's Piano Sonata K545 in C major would provide an interesting example from the classical repertoire. The performance of scales from repertoire will provide a visual and auditory explanation and will establish a cognitive experience and understanding because the student first experiences the scale in the context of performance, which is something that excites the artisan student. Then the teacher explains that scales exist in different kinds of repertoire, can sound differently from each other, can be played in different tempi and dynamic levels, and could be exciting to play. The teacher offers the experience of hearing and seeing scales performed, which helps the student to experience the big picture. Once the artisan student is hooked or interested in performing scales, then a natural desire to learn scales will develop, and further details will be needed. The teacher moves from showing scales in several contexts to the more tedious and potentially tiresome aspects of intervals, notes, and fingering. This second portion of the explanation should be kept as brief and uncomplicated as possible. The artisan is quite interested in playing scales, but may lose interest if swamped with too many details. Because an artisan likes motion and movement, the details of the scale might be taught with the kinesthetic approach. The teacher plays C, D, E with right hand fingers 1, 2, 3, and asks the student to repeat. This is followed by F, G, A, B, C, right hand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher demonstrates the thumb crossing under finger 3, and the whole scale is put together. At this point, after some trial and error and feedback, the teacher may simply end the teaching session with the right hand playing a 1-octave C major scale. Because the artisan loves to perform and experience new things, the teacher might assign the scale in different rhythms, tempi, registers on the piano, or dynamic levels. All of these changes will keep the artisan student excited to play scales. As time goes by, the artisan is introduced, one at a time, to different keys, to hands together, and to a more detailed explanation of intervallic construction and scale degrees. The initial instruction, however, is designed to spark their interest and keep them motivated. The guardian student understands and appreciates rules. For an artisan, rules are somewhat tiresome, but for a guardian, rules are the foundation and guidelines for everything they do. They like security and gain confidence from knowing they are following a process. When teaching a C major scale, the teacher might use a behavioral approach, perhaps starting with stimulus and response that introduces the details. The guardian student is unlikely to chase under a step-by-step approach and will appreciate receiving small bits of instruction at a time. The teacher might begin by presenting the scale in notation to the student. Emphasizing that the fingering rules cannot be broken, the teacher would demonstrate a 2-octave hand-separate scale, noting that right hand and left hand fingering are exact mirrors of each other. As the student repeats step by step one hand, then another, 1 octave, then 2 octaves, the rules of the scale fingering are constantly being reinforced, both verbally and visually, by referring to the notated scale. In time, the guardian student is made aware of scales in a global perspective. Their understanding will grow, and when they are comfortable with scales in different keys, tempi, rhythm, etc., the larger picture is gradually becoming clear. Whereas the guardian student finds security and satisfaction in following rules, the rational student finds enjoyment and satisfaction in understanding concepts and constructions. This student may be less interested in performing scales than the artisan, and may show a great deal of attention to the smallest details. Because the rational student is able to grasp complex structures, he may appreciate a cognitive approach in a micro perspective. In other words, the teacher helps the rational student experience the smallest details. By having the student build the intervallic structure of a major scale, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, either by playing, drawing, or notating from any note on the piano, the teacher is providing the student an experience with the minutest details of a major scale. Once the rational student experiences the construction of a major scale and can recreate it anywhere on the piano, simply by its intervals, the student has an experience to which more specific details, such as scale fingering rules, can be contributed to. This is the cognitive approach, details being added once an experience has occurred. Throughout the process of adding details, the rules behind issues such as scale fingerings must be reiterated. Whereas the guardian student would have been content to know the fingering rules, The rational student must know the reason behind the rule. For example, scale fingering rules that help the student avoid thumbs on black keys, twisting hands, or uncomfortable positions should all be explained. The fourth and final sample student is the idealist. This student is particularly sensitive to the health of the teacher-student relationship and cares deeply about the teacher's impression of him. How diligently the idealist applies himself to the subject matter is affected by the emotional atmosphere